A blizzard. A 10-year-old girl, lost in the mountains, clutching her two newborn siblings in a blanket soaked with cold and silence. No food. No fire. No sign of their mother. Just a frozen forest, and one old dog who hadn't barked in years. What happened next would spark a rescue that no one believed possible. If your heart is ready, hit like, subscribe, and stay till the end. This isn't just survival, it's a story of quiet heroes and the fire that never dies. The storm had begun before sunrise and showed no sign of relenting. 10 Sleep, Wyoming, an old mountain town carved into the edge of the Bighorn National Forest, was buried in wind and snow. Trees cracked under frozen weight. The wind screamed over the ridgelines, whistling through every pine needle like a warning from something ancient. In the middle of that white wilderness, a child walked alone. Ellie Mae Carter, 10 years old, was small for her age, with pale skin and long, tangled light brown hair that shimmered with a touch of auburn in the right light. Her cheeks were raw from the cold, her jacket too big, her scarf fraying at the edges. But her arms were full, she was carrying something more fragile than herself, her baby twin brothers, Theo and James, just over 2 weeks old. They were wrapped tightly in soft fleece blankets, thick enough to hold in what little warmth remained, and tucked deep against Ellie's chest beneath her oversized coat. The twins barely moved, save for the soft rise and fall of tiny breaths, their faces peeking from layers of fabric like fragile dolls in a winter cradle. Her boots sunk into the snow with each step, and her breathing came in short bursts, visible against the wind like threads of glass. They hadn't always lived like this, in a remote cabin, on the edge of silence and snow. Just a year ago, the Carters had shared a duplex in Cheyenne, full of bedtime stories and the smell of toast in the morning. Her father, Mark Carter, had worked for the local fire department, strong hands, kind voice, always humming when he cooked. But one morning, during a supply run on an icy stretch of road, his truck hit black ice and rolled. Ellie remembered the knock on the door. The woman in uniform. Her mother's hands trembling. After that, everything slipped. Abigail tried to hold the world together, working night shifts at 2 clinics, selling off furniture, and finally moving them into an old family-owned hunting cabin in 10 Sleep. Just until spring, she had said, kissing Ellie's forehead. We'll reset out here. Just us. But winter came earlier than expected. And harder. 3 days ago, Abigail Carter, 34, once a calm and decisive nurse with a sharp mind and tired eyes, made a difficult choice. Their food was down to the last can of beans. The formula was nearly gone. The storm had wiped out all signal, and their old generator had died the week before. Abigail, her hair pinned beneath a knit cap, stared at her children by the fire. 1 bottle left, she whispered, mostly to herself. 2, maybe. Then she moved, quiet but certain. She packed her last warm coat, a small first aid kit, and a thermos of melted snow. She knelt beside Ellie, who was trying to keep the fire going with scraps of broken chair legs. Ellie, she said gently but firmly, there's a ranger station 4 miles down the ridge. They used to keep emergency supplies. Maybe they still do. I'm going to try. Ellie blinked. But what if you get lost? I won't, Abigail smiled faintly. If I don't go, we're out of food tomorrow. You know what to do, right? Ellie nodded, tears already pooling. Keep the fire going. Keep them warm. Abigail pulled her daughter into a tight hug, her breath warm in Ellie's ear. You're strong, baby. Stronger than me. Then she was gone. That was 3 days ago. And now Ellie, stiff with cold and barely standing, carried both babies down what she hoped was the right trail. The snow had erased every sign of her mother's tracks. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore. The wind screamed louder. Her knees buckled. She fell forward into the snow, twisting to shield the babies with her body. She lay there, chest heaving, barely able to lift her head. "I tried," she whispered to them, her voice hoarse. "I tried." Then, a bark. Not far. Deep and sharp. Ellie's head jerked up. A shadow moved through the trees. A large dog, broad-shouldered, muscular, fur grizzled with age and snow. Buck, a German shepherd in his senior years, with a notched left ear and a slow but steady gait, stood alert. His breath puffed from his snout in quick clouds. He stepped cautiously forward, head low, eyes golden and intelligent. He barked again, short, urgent. Another shadow followed behind him. Walter Harlan, 72, tall and broad-backed, emerged through the blizzard. He wore a thick canvas coat patched at the elbows, a wool cap over snow-white hair, and carried a hunting rifle slung across his shoulder. His face, framed by a beard turned silver, bore deep lines carved by grief and mountain winters. A former rescue medic and retired firefighter, Walter had lived alone in his cabin for nearly 20 years, ever since a landslide took his wife and daughter in one single, merciless moment. He hadn't seen another soul in weeks. Now, a little girl and 2 infants lay in the snow at his feet. He knelt immediately, his large hands surprisingly gentle. "Jesus," he muttered. "Hold on, little one." He pulled off his gloves, pressed his hand to Ellie's cheek. "Still warm." "Barely." "Theo." "James," Ellie breathed, almost unconscious. "They're cold." Walter didn't ask questions. He picked up the children, Ellie over one shoulder, the babies cradled to his chest beneath his coat. Buck barked once and turned, leading the way down a hidden path. Back at the cabin, fire roared to life. Walter wrapped the twins in wool, placed them in an old basket lined with flannel. He laid Ellie on his couch near the hearth and rubbed her hands with ointment. He gave her sips of warm broth. He moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before, even if his heart hadn't in years. Buck settled down beside the basket, one paw resting protectively over its edge. That night, Walter didn't sleep. He sat in the rocking chair, staring into the firelight. 3 strangers breathed in his home. But for the first time in years, the silence did not ache. It hummed, with life. Walter Harlan moved through the cabin with the deliberate precision of someone who had learned long ago not to waste motion, not time, not words, not warmth. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him, sealing out the storm's howling rage. He set Ellie down gently on a wool blanket stretched over the sofa near the fireplace, then carefully shifted the 2 bundled infants from under his coat into an old wicker basket he pulled from under a bench. The basket was worn, its handle frayed and edges softened from years of disuse, once a cradle for his daughter before the mountain took her. Now, it held life again. He knelt beside Ellie, checking her pulse with rough but gentle fingers. Her lips were pale, her breathing shallow but rhythmic. "You're a tough little thing," he muttered, more to himself than her. Buck, his old German shepherd, settled quietly near the basket, ears pricked, golden eyes alert. The dog didn't bark now, just watched, breathing slow and steady, like a silent sentinel. Buck was 12, a war dog once, then a rescue partner during Walter's years with the Wilderness Response Team. His body bore the wear of old injuries, a stiff right leg, a patch of white across one shoulder where fur never grew back, but his senses were sharp, especially his ability to read people. Walter often said Buck had better judgment than most humans. Walter poured warm water from the kettle hanging above the hearth and soaked a clean cloth, gently wiping the frost from Ellie's cheeks. Her hair, light brown with hints of auburn, was tangled and frozen in places, and her hands were red and stiff. He rubbed ointment onto her fingers and wrapped them in dry wool. For the babies, he checked their breathing and temperature, then layered more flannel over them. He didn't have formula, but he had goat's milk powdered in a jar, something his neighbor had traded for firewood before moving south for the winter. It would have to do. Outside, the wind continued to howl like a wounded beast. Inside, the cabin was quiet but full of breath, human, canine, and fragile. Walter rose, his joints popping from years of mountain winters, and stepped into the small kitchen space. It wasn't much, just a propane burner, an old cooler he kept packed with snow, a few shelves stacked with dried beans, rice, and whatever he trapped or smoked last fall. He found broth, reheated it slowly, and brought a mug back to the couch. Ellie stirred as he brushed her hair from her forehead. "Hey," he said softly, crouching. "You awake?" Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then locking onto him with a sudden spike of fear. "The twins," she croaked. "Safe. Warm." "You are too," he said. "You're in my cabin. My name's Walter." She didn't answer, but her eyes scanned the room, landing on Buck. "The dog. Buck. He's better than a heater, and smarter than me," he said with a half-smile. "He found you." Ellie's throat tightened, and she looked down at her lap. "My mom, she went to get help. She said she'd be back before dark." Walter's jaw tensed. "What day?" 3 days ago." He nodded slowly. "Storm's been heavy since then. Roads are blocked." "You walked a long way." Ellie's gaze dropped. "I didn't know if it was the right direction." "It was," he said. "Barely. If Buck hadn't caught your scent, we might not be having this talk." He offered the broth. She took it with trembling hands, sipping slowly. The warmth bloomed through her chest like sunlight through frosted glass. Hours passed quietly. Walter didn't push questions. Ellie didn't offer answers. The fire kept burning. He sat in his old rocking chair across the room, eyes half closed, listening to the wind and the crackle of sap in the wood. That night, he laid an old mattress on the floor beside the fireplace for Ellie, with his thickest quilt tucked under her chin. Buck remained by the basket, occasionally nosing the blankets to check on the twins. Walter, sitting back in his chair, watched them all, this sudden family that fate had dropped into his solitude. In the flickering light, Ellie's hair reminded him of Anna, his daughter. She'd been 12 when the avalanche came. They'd been hiking, just the two of them, testing snowshoes for fun. He still remembered the sound, like the earth inhaling, then roaring. He never found her body, just her backpack, half buried under a pine. The next morning brought a fragile peace. The storm eased. The snow outside still lay thick and deep, but the sky lightened into a dull pewter. Walter woke early, as always, and set water to boil. As he moved about the cabin, Ellie watched him from her makeshift bed, silent. She had questions, clearly. But she waited. Walter finally turned to her. "You got a name?" "Ellie Mae Carter," she whispered. He nodded. "All right, Ellie Mae Carter. I'm Walter Harlan. Welcome to my slice of frozen heaven." He handed her a tin bowl with oatmeal and honey. "You eat. Then we'll check on your brothers again." She hesitated. "Are you going to call someone? Tell them we're here?" He paused. "I don't have a phone. Closest line's down at Jenkins Ranch, 6 miles south. Trails blocked." Ellie's shoulders sagged. She looked down at the twins again. "What if my mom's still out there?" Walter met her eyes, steady and calm. "Then we wait. And when it's safe, we go look. But until then, we survive." For the first time since she arrived, Ellie nodded, small, but firm. Outside, Buck stood at the door, his tail sweeping slow arcs. He barked once, short, alert. Walter stepped to the window and peered through frost. Nothing. But Buck didn't bark often without reason. "We'll figure this out," Walter said, more to himself than to anyone. Behind him, the fire cracked. 3 breaths rose in the room, and the mountain watched in silence. The wind outside had softened, no longer howling like a wounded animal but whispering along the eaves of the small mountain cabin. Inside, the fire crackled softly, casting shifting amber light over the rough wood walls and worn furniture. Ellie lay on the small cot beside the fireplace, her back warmed by the flames, her arms curved protectively around the basket that held her two infant brothers. Their tiny bodies were bundled in thick woolen blankets, barely moving but breathing steadily now. She stirred awake in the stillness, her lashes fluttering open to catch the glint of orange and shadow on the ceiling. For a moment, she didn't move. She was unsure if she had dreamt the warmth, the firelight, the scent of cooking oats, and the quiet. It wasn't silence, exactly. It was the absence of sobs, of the desperate cries of babies too cold to cry for long. That, in itself, was startling. It had been so long since the twins had slept soundly. Buck lay stretched out beside her on the rug, his body curled just enough to form a barrier between her and the door. The old German shepherd was a statue of quiet vigilance, ears twitching now and then, but otherwise motionless. His fur had patches of gray at the muzzle and tail, and a scar sliced through one eyebrow like a faint crescent moon, but his eyes, half open in the dim light, were sharp. He didn't sleep deeply, not anymore. Walter Harlan sat in the worn armchair, boots off, one hand resting on a mug of lukewarm coffee, the other holding a small photo in his lap. The photo was faded, the edges curled. A young girl, maybe 9, maybe 10, with the same ginger-brown hair as Ellie smiled from the paper. Her name had been Anna. Ellie finally spoke, her voice little more than a whisper. She didn't come back. Walter looked up gently, not pressing, waiting. My mom, Ellie continued. She left the cabin 3 days ago. Said she'd be quick. She was scared the boys had a fever. I told her not to go. Her voice cracked, but she caught herself, shaking her head. She wrapped the babies tight. Told me to stay inside and keep the fire going. But the wind blew the chimney smoke sideways. The fire went out. I couldn't find dry wood. She drew in a breath, lips trembling. I thought I could follow her. But the snow, it got too deep. I fell. That's all I remember. Walter stood slowly, his knees stiff but sure. He crouched by her side, placing a warm, calloused hand gently on her shoulder. You kept them alive, he said simply. That's more than most grown folk could have done. Ellie's eyes filled but didn't spill. What if she's out there? Walter didn't promise false comfort. He didn't say she was fine. He only nodded once, firm. Tomorrow, I go down the ridge. There's a ranger station 2 valleys over. I'll find someone. Buck lifted his head, eyes following Walter like they always did. Walter turned to the stove, where a small pot of porridge simmered. Can you help stir while I check the maps? He asked. Ellie nodded, wiping her eyes on her sleeve. She moved gently, conscious of every creak in the floor and every change in her brother's breathing. Walter pulled a rolled canvas map from a shelf and laid it across the kitchen table. Years ago, he'd marked every trail and old forest road, every spot where an avalanche had once fallen. He had walked every inch of this mountain range in his days as a rescue worker, and despite the time, the terrain still lived in his bones. The next morning, snow still drifted lazily from the sky, but the clouds were breaking. Walter packed a small rucksack, medical kit, flares, thermal blankets, energy bars, and slid on his thick boots. Before leaving, he looked at Ellie. I'll be gone a few hours. You'll be all right? Ellie nodded. We'll be okay. Buck will stay. Buck wagged his tail once, a slow sweep across the floor. Walter started off down the trail with steady steps, boots crunching the packed snow. It wasn't far to the ranger station, but far enough to make his chest ache a little with worry. Back in the cabin, Ellie moved quietly. She changed the baby's cloths, fed them small spoonfuls of watered milk from a bottle she found in Walter's pantry. She wasn't sure if the formula was too old, but it smelled fine. She sang softly, not real words, just sounds, to keep them soothed. Around midday, a knock startled her. She jumped. Buck growled low and moved in front of her. But the knock came again, lighter this time. A woman's voice followed. "Hello? Is anyone here?" Ellie crept to the door and peeked through the crack. A woman stood outside, wrapped in a tan Forest Service coat, snow crusting the edges of her dark curly hair. She looked to be in her late 30s, tall and wiry, cheeks pink from the cold. Her name tag read, S. Kim. "I'm Sarah," the woman called. "Walter sent me ahead. He's just behind me." Relief surged through Ellie, and she opened the door slightly. Sarah Kim stepped inside, immediately surveying the room with calm, trained eyes. She had the air of someone used to emergencies, to making decisions in chaos. A former combat medic turned wilderness responder, Sarah had seen enough broken bones and frozen toes to recognize danger fast. She knelt beside the basket, checking the infants with gentle, practiced hands. "They're cold, but stable," she said. "And you've done well." Buck sniffed her once, then returned to his spot beside Ellie. Walter entered soon after, brushing snow from his shoulders. "The station's sending a snowmobile with a med crew," he said. "They're 2 hours out. Abigail, your mother, wasn't at the station. But they'll get word to other posts." Ellie's face fell slightly but she nodded. Sarah crouched beside her. "We'll find her. But right now, we keep you warm. You and your brothers did something incredible." As the afternoon passed, the cabin filled with a quiet bustle. Sarah boiled water, wrapped the babies in clean blankets, and started mixing fresh formula. Walter chopped wood to keep the fire alive. Ellie watched them all, unsure if she was dreaming again. That night, as the wind picked up once more, there were still no cries. Only the hush of breath, of warmth, of 3 lives held safe, for now. The storm had not passed, only softened. By morning, the snow fell in slow, thick curtains, blanketing the forest in an eerie stillness. Outside Walter's cabin in the northern Colorado highlands, the pines groaned beneath their weight, and each footstep sank with a hush. The world had become muted, frozen in breath. But inside, a quiet urgency pulsed through the air. Walter Harlan, now 74, stood by the fire wrapping a thick scarf around his neck. His hair was white and unkempt beneath a knit cap, and his beard, streaked with silver, was trimmed short but weathered with the signs of a man who had stopped caring about mirrors long ago. He wore an old army coat, patched at the elbows, and his boots had long ago molded to the shape of his gait. His breath came harder these days when the air was too cold, and his knees reminded him of every storm he had trudged through in his former life as a mountain rescue captain. But his eyes, clear gray, steady as granite, still held purpose. Ellie sat near the fireplace, bundled with the twins in a wool blanket that smelled faintly of cedar. She had not asked him to stay. She had only looked at him that morning with those 2 large eyes, quiet and serious, and said, "They didn't cry last night." Walter knew what she meant. It was the kind of quiet no child should understand, when silence meant danger. When a baby didn't even have the strength to wail. He placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "I'll be back before dark," he said. "Buck will stay. He's good at standing guard." Buck, the 11-year-old German shepherd, lay beside her. His fur was thick but grizzled with age, his build still strong but slower now, his movements deliberate. His right ear no longer stood upright, a souvenir from an ice rescue 10 winters ago, and his left hip bore a scar shaped like a crooked star. Yet despite his age, Buck had a way of sensing things before they happened. It wasn't just instinct, it was memory etched into muscle. Walter slung a heavy canvas pack across his back, emergency rations, a flare gun, a 2-way radio, and a small locator beacon. The trudge to the ranger outpost was 4 miles through snowdrifts that could swallow a full-grown man. He had made the trek before, but not in years. And not alone. Ellie watched him go without a word. She was learning what goodbyes meant in the mountains. The forest greeted him in silence. Branches sagged low under the burden of white. The trail was almost invisible, but Walter's steps were confident, each foot planted like he still had something to prove to the mountain. He kept his breathing steady, conserving warmth. By midday, the wind picked up again, cutting across the slope like a blade. An hour into the descent, his boot slipped on a patch of snow-covered stone. In one breathless instant, he was down, one leg plunging between the rocks, his knee twisted hard against a hidden ledge. Pain shot through his side as he gritted his teeth, falling back against a snowbank with a muffled groan. He couldn't move the leg. "Damn it," he hissed, reaching for the radio. Static. He tried again, adjusting the dial with numb fingers. "Mayday, this is Harlan. Down north of Eagle's Notch. Repeat." But the line broke again into silence. The snow was picking up. If he didn't get warm, he wouldn't last the night. Back at the cabin, Buck stirred. He had been lying by the fire, half asleep, when something shifted in the air. Not a sound, not a scent, something deeper. He stood, walked in a slow circle, then stood facing the door. His ears twitched. Ellie noticed. "What is it?" she whispered. Buck didn't answer. He let out a low, anxious growl, turned once more, and trotted to the front of the cabin. He pawed the door. Then again, harder. "You're not supposed to go," Ellie said, standing up. But Buck turned, eyes locked on hers, and let out a short bark, sharp, urgent. Ellie froze, then reached for the latch. She didn't know why, but she opened the door. Buck vanished into the snow. Walter was losing time. His leg had begun to swell, and the cold was seeping into his chest. He had wrapped himself as best he could, his back to a tree stump, one arm clutching the radio, the other resting across his lap. He was drifting. Then, movement. A rustle, a crunch, a presence. Through the swirling snow, a shape appeared. Large, low to the ground, moving fast. Buck. The shepherd let out a sharp bark, circled Walter once, then sat beside him, pressing his warm flank to the man's good side. Walter blinked back a rush of emotion. "You old fool," he murmured. "How the hell did you know?" Buck didn't answer. He only leaned harder, his weight steady and warm, his breathing rhythmic. He had come not just to find, but to stay. Walter gathered his strength. Together, they waited. Back at the cabin, Ellie did her best. She checked the babies, stoked the fire, wrapped more cloths around their feet. She stood by the window long into the night, waiting for a sound. For the jingle of a collar or a voice in the snow. But nothing came. She curled beside the babies, whispering promises into their sleeping ears. "He'll come back. Buck too. They always do." Outside, the wind rose again. The wind howled like a wounded creature outside the cabin, shaking the shutters and brushing snow against the old wood like ghostly fingers. Inside, the dim light of the fire cast long shadows across the floor, and in their midst sat Ellie, barefoot, bundled in two oversized coats, her hair damp and cheeks red from worry and the chill that lingered even in the warmth. The twins, still swaddled in thick blankets Walter had wrapped around them days before, lay in a makeshift cradle carved from a drawer lined with furs. They stirred restlessly, their faces pale and drawn, their cries dry from thirst. Buck was gone. Walter had not returned. And Ellie was alone. Her small hands trembled as she fumbled with the flint striker, the same one she had watched Walter use earlier in the week. Sparks flew, but the firewood remained stubborn and damp. Her teeth clenched. She tried again, striking harder, closer to the pine shavings she had gathered. This time, the spark caught, a flame flickered, and she gasped with relief. She leaned in, shielding it with her fingers as the flame grew, licking at the bark like a hungry tongue. She had made fire. Just like he showed her. Ellie let out a shaky breath and leaned back, the warmth beginning to chase the numbness from her fingers. She looked at the clock Walter kept on the wall. It had stopped ticking 2 days ago. Outside, the world had no time. Only snow. The babies whimpered again. Ellie pushed herself up and shuffled to the cupboard, reaching high for the tin of powdered milk Walter had told her about, the one with the handwritten label and instructions she could barely read. She held it to her chest, then grabbed a metal mug and poured in the powder, then added snowmelt water from the kettle Walter had left on the stove. It wasn't boiling, but it was warm enough. She stirred the mixture slowly, cautiously, then tested it on her wrist just like her mom had shown her back when they still had mornings in a kitchen and lullabies on the radio. One by one, she fed her siblings with a dropper she found in Walter's medicine kit, humming a slow, familiar tune, "You Are My Sunshine," soft and trembling. It was the same song her mother used to sing when their trailer still stood. When their world hadn't yet frozen. Afterward, Ellie curled beside the twins, wrapping them in her arms, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "I'll take care of you," she murmured, "until he comes back. I swear." Across the forest, Buck kept his body pressed to Walter's side. The old man was still breathing, though shallow and uneven. His face was pale, lips tinged blue. Buck knew cold too well. He had pulled bodies from it. Once, long ago, he had even stayed 3 nights beside a skier buried in snow until a rescue team arrived. But back then, Buck had not been alone. He remembered that mission. The girl they saved had been 12, with jet-black hair and tears frozen on her cheeks. She had called Walter, the mountain angel. And she had lived. But that same winter, a wall of snow had taken Walter's daughter while she waited at the ranger station for her father to return. Buck had heard the scream from miles away, before they even reached her. That day had changed Walter. He had walked down from the mountain and never returned to rescue work again. But he kept Buck. And Buck, now more memory than muscle, would not leave him here. At dawn, Walter stirred. It was faint, a twitch in his left hand, a soft grunt, but it was enough. Buck leaned in, pressing his snout into Walter's cheek. "Still alive, huh?" Walter rasped. His breath smoked in the cold air. Buck gave a low, encouraging growl. "Damn legs done for," Walter muttered, trying to sit up. Pain shot through his hip, and he winced, but managed to shift against the tree. "Beacon. Where's the—" He reached for the locator and pressed the button. A red light blinked. Weak signal, but still active. Now it was a matter of waiting. Back at the cabin, Ellie woke to silence again. But this time, it was a silence filled with purpose. She got up, checked the fire, changed the cloths on her siblings, and fed them again, this time faster, more confidently. Then she opened Walter's journal on the table. It wasn't a diary, exactly. It was more like a logbook filled with field sketches, names, and events, rescue records from years past. On the last page, there was a photo taped in. A girl. Red hair like hers. A date, 15 years ago. And a name she didn't recognize, Clara Harlan. Walter's daughter. Ellie traced the outline of the photograph with her finger. Buck's name was scrawled underneath, in Walter's tight handwriting, the last to come down. Ellie suddenly understood why Walter had kept the dog all these years. Why he lived alone. Why he had risked so much to bring her inside. Later that night, the radio on the counter crackled to life. Static, then a voice. "Station 9 to Eagle Notch. We received your beacon. Repeat, Walter Harlan, are you transmitting?" Ellie's eyes widened. She ran to the radio and fumbled with the mic. "This is Ellie. Walter went down the mountain. He didn't come back. But, Buck went to find him." Silence, then, "Stay inside, Ellie. We're coming." And finally, she let herself cry. The morning broke slowly, sifting pale light through the heavy evergreens. A bitter fog hung over the woods, curling through branches like ghost breath, swallowing sound, softening footsteps. Somewhere in the depths of the forest, the rhythmic crunch of snowshoes echoed, a small rescue team moving carefully, their radios whispering updates, their eyes scanning for any signs of life beyond the frost. Leading the team was Ranger Dana Holt, a seasoned backcountry responder in her late 40s, tall and wiry, with a stern jaw softened by streaks of gray hair tied beneath a fleece-lined cap. Dana had the kind of presence that calmed people even in disaster zones, not through gentleness, but through grounded competence. She rarely smiled, but when she did, it came from the eyes first. Years ago, she had lost a teammate to an avalanche. Since then, she had made it her mission to never let panic take the lead. "Signals coming from about 100 meters ahead," she said, squinting at the handheld transceiver. Her breath rose in short puffs. A young volunteer named Louise trailed behind her, barely 22, cheeks pink from exertion and nerves. "You think it's Walter? Or someone else?" Dana didn't answer right away. She had known Walter Harlan from before his disappearance into the hills, back when he still brought Buck down for supplies, back when grief hadn't turned his voice to gravel and his eyes to stone. "I think," she said finally, "we'll find out soon enough." They broke the tree-lean moments later and stopped in unison. The cabin stood like a relic from another time, half buried in snow, smoke curling from its crooked chimney. The porch sagged under ice, but a faint light flickered behind the window. Dana raised a hand, signaling silence. Then she heard it, a sound so soft it barely rose above the hush of falling snow. A melody. A lullaby. She approached the door, knocked once, then pushed it open. Inside, the world was strangely still. A girl sat on the floor before the hearth, cradling two sleeping infants wrapped in heavy blankets. Her red blonde hair was tied in a loose braid, face smudged with soot and fatigue. She looked up when the light shifted, but said nothing, only held the babies closer. Beside her, an elderly man lay bundled beneath layers of wool and jackets. A makeshift four-line ran from his arm to a bottle hanging from a broomstick. His face was pale, but breathing. And near the fireplace, a large German shepherd rested with his muzzle on crossed paws, one ear twitching slightly. His fur was dusted with ash and snow, and his eyes opened slowly, watching the newcomers without alarm. Dana's breath caught. "Ellie?" she asked gently. "Your name's Ellie, right?" The girl nodded, eyes wary but not afraid. Dana knelt beside her. "You did all this?" Ellie nodded again, slower this time. Louis stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes darting between the babies, the old man, and the dog. "They're all alive." Dana checked Walter's pulse, then glanced at the four. "She's not just alive, she kept him alive." "Where's your mom, sweetheart?" Dana asked. Ellie's lips trembled, but she spoke. "She went to find help. 3 days ago. She didn't come back." Dana placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now. We're going to take care of you." Outside, more responders arrived, carrying medical packs and stretchers. Louise called for the sleds. While Walter was examined and stabilized, Dana stayed with Ellie. She learned about the fire that had destroyed their trailer, about the temporary shelter in the hills, the failed supply run, and the mother who never returned. Ellie recounted everything in quiet, clipped sentences. But when she spoke of Walter and Buck, her voice steadied. "He found me," she said. "Buck did. He brought me here." Dana turned to look at the dog, now rising slowly to his feet, walking stiffly to Ellie's side. His back legs moved with slight stiffness, his age showing in the way his steps sank deeper into the floorboards. But there was strength in him still. "You're a good boy," she murmured. Buck wagged his tail once, then laid his head on Ellie's knee. As Walter was carried out on a sled wrapped in blankets, Ellie clutched the twins and followed with Dana close beside her. Louise helped carry the babies, holding one carefully to his chest, visibly nervous. "I've never even held a baby before," he whispered. "You're doing fine," Dana replied. They descended the mountain slowly, 2 sleds trailing behind, the radio team staying in contact with the base camp. Around them, the forest remained quiet, save for the occasional bird call or the crunch of snow beneath boot. Buck padded behind them faithfully, never straying far from Ellie. By the time they reached the ranger outpost, dusk was falling. Medical teams were already waiting, along with warm food and blankets. One of the nurses, a warm-faced woman named Trina with dark curls tucked beneath her cap, approached Ellie with open arms. She had a softness to her, the kind of smile that could melt even the iciest fear. Ellie hesitated, then stepped into the hug and let herself be held. Walter, still weak, was placed in a heated cabin with medical supervision. He insisted Buck stay with him, and when the dog curled up at his side without protest, no one argued. Later that night, as Ellie sat beside the fire at the outpost with a bowl of soup in her lap and the twins tucked safely into heated bassinets, Dana brought her a wool blanket and crouched beside her. "You did something extraordinary up there," she said. "You kept them alive. You didn't wait for someone to save you. You were the someone." Ellie blinked, unsure how to respond. Dana added softly, "You remind me of someone I used to know. Brave, even when scared. Kind, even when hurting." Ellie gave a small nod. Then, hesitantly, she whispered, "Is my mom coming?" Dana didn't lie. "We're looking for her. And we won't stop until we know." Buck let out a low, comforting sound from across the room. And in the quiet that followed, it was not the forest that cried anymore, it was the people who had finally been found. The rhythmic hum of helicopter blades cut through the silence of the snow-covered forest. As the rescue team prepared the stretchers, the sky above cracked open with a golden sliver of morning sun, casting long shadows over the clearing. Ellie sat bundled between thick blankets, one twin in her arms, the other nestled in a heated carrier beside her. Her cheeks were pale but her eyes were alert, scanning every movement with the vigilance of someone who had lived too many years in too few days. Walter Harlan was carefully lifted into the chopper on a stretcher, his face barely visible beneath layers of wool, his lips tinged with gray. He drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling now and then in short, broken phrases, sometimes the name of his daughter, sometimes just, Buck. His body was exhausted, his strength depleted after too many hours lying in the cabin. Yet a stubborn fire still lingered behind his eyelids, an ember of will refusing to go out. Buck limped toward the open helicopter door, favoring his front left paw, the fur matted with blood where a sharp piece of ice had sliced through during his frantic rescue run. The medic, a broad-shouldered man named Ben Carter, crouched beside the old German shepherd and gently examined the injury. Ben, in his mid-30s, with warm brown eyes and steady hands, had served 2 tours as a combat medic. Animals, like soldiers, rarely cried out unless it really hurt, and Buck hadn't made a sound. "He's a fighter," Ben murmured, wrapping the leg with sterile gauze and securing a soft brace. "You ride up front with me, buddy." Buck let out a low huff of agreement and was helped into the chopper. The twins, still too young to understand what was happening, slept soundly through the entire process. Ellie, however, remained tense. It was only when Dana Holt placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder that she leaned back slightly and exhaled for the first time since morning. "You did good, kid," Dana said, fastening Ellie's harness. "We'll be at the hospital soon. You'll be warm. The babies will be safe. Walter will be looked after. And Buck, well, we've got the best vet waiting." Ellie nodded but said nothing. Her gaze never left the snowy trees receding below as the helicopter lifted. The small regional hospital in Pine River Valley was modest in size but well equipped. News of the mountain rescue had reached them hours earlier, and the emergency bay was prepped before the chopper landed. Nurses swarmed in with heated blankets and 4 bags. Pediatric specialists whisked the twins into the neonatal unit, checking for signs of frostbite, dehydration, and low sugar levels. Despite everything, both babies were stable, an outcome that had the chief pediatrician shaking her head in disbelief. Whoever kept these babies alive up there, she muttered, knew what they were doing. Walter was taken to the ICU for monitoring, placed under the care of Dr. Elaine Simmons, a silver-haired trauma physician in her early 60s with a sharp eye and a no-nonsense demeanor. She recognized Walter the moment she saw him. "Walter Harlan," she whispered, checking his vitals. "Still stubborn as hell." They had worked together decades ago during a landslide relief operation. She knew of the tragedy that took his daughter. And she could see in his half-conscious grip, fingers curling toward nothing, the echo of that loss now transmuted into something new, something saved. Buck was sent to the vet clinic connected to the hospital grounds, a quiet building with pine paneling and the faint scent of antiseptic and fur. The vet on call was Dr. Nadia Chu, a petite woman with soft brown skin, a crown of black curls tucked beneath her cap, and a soothing voice that calmed even the most distressed animals. She examined Buck carefully, noting his age, probably around 12, and the subtle tremor in his joints. "He's arthritic. Hip dysplasia. Old injuries. But the leg wound is clean," she told Dana. "We'll sedate him, stitch it up, and start him on antibiotics and joint support. He's going to need rest." Dana nodded, watching through the glass as Buck was gently placed on the table. "He won't rest until Walter does." In a quiet room on the second floor, Ellie sat on a hospital bed wrapped in a too large sweater and wool socks. A social worker named Linda Travers came in with hot cocoa and a clipboard. Linda was in her 50s, with a kind face, soft-spoken but perceptive. She didn't pry. Instead, she asked Ellie simple questions. Did she feel safe? Was she in pain? Did she want to rest? Ellie answered politely, though briefly. Her eyes kept darting toward the door. And then, it opened. A nurse walked in, breathless. "We found her." Linda stood. "Her mother?" The nurse nodded. "She's alive. Barely conscious, but yes. About 3 miles southeast of the cabin. Collapsed near a frozen stream. Hypothermic, dehydrated, but she's here." Before the words could fully settle, the door opened again. 2 EMTs wheeled in a stretcher. Ellie leapt off the bed and ran. The woman lying on the stretcher was pale, lips cracked, hair clinging to her cheeks in wet, frozen clumps. But when she heard the approaching footsteps, those small, desperate feet, her eyes flickered open. "Ellie," she rasped. "Mom." The girl flung herself onto the edge of the stretcher, wrapping her arms around what little space she could find, careful not to disturb the 4 lines. Tears streamed down both their faces. Dana, watching from the hall, let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Linda turned away, blinking fast. The reunion made the local news within hours. "Mountain Miracle," read the headlines. Reporters camped outside the hospital, hoping for a glimpse of the brave girl and the legendary dog. But inside the walls of that small clinic, things were kept quiet. Walter stabilized. Buck slept soundly. Ellie held her mother's hand all night. The babies were thriving. And for the first time in weeks, there was no fear in the air, only warmth. 3 weeks had passed since the snow gave way to sun and the mountains let go of their hold on 3 children and the souls who protected them. Spring crept quietly over the ridge, one warm gust at a time, melting the ice crust on pine branches and replacing the howling winds with birdsong. The hospital had long since discharged Ellie, her mother, the twins, and Walter. But instead of returning to the city, something deeper, older, called them back north. Walter Harlan, now recovering but still stooped and slow with age, stood firm in his refusal to move back to the town of Pine River Valley. "I belong up there," he'd muttered to the doctors, to the nurses, to Dana and to Ellie. "Always have. Always will." He didn't say it out loud, but everyone knew, his heart was buried on that mountain, beside the memory of the daughter he'd lost, in the old rescue outpost now abandoned by everyone but ghosts and snow. Ellie's mother, Claire Dawson, now restored from near death, was not the type to romanticize the wilderness. A woman in her early 30s, Claire had soft gray eyes that held more fatigue than her age should permit. Her once dark auburn hair was now streaked with early silver, not from age, but from grief and grit. A registered nurse, Claire had volunteered in crisis zones before, but nothing had prepared her for losing her husband to the avalanche and nearly losing her children to the cold. She had always been pragmatic. But when Ellie looked at her with wide, earnest eyes and said, "I don't want to leave the mountain," not completely, Claire hesitated. And then she asked, almost against her nature, "What do you mean?" So Ellie explained. They wouldn't go back to the exact cabin, not to the one where memories clung like frost to the windows. But perhaps, just a short distance from there, they could build something new. A place not just for them, but for others. A resting station for hikers who lost their way. A spot where no one would ever be truly alone in the woods again. And Walter, sitting quietly by the fireplace in the hospital lounge, nodded once and said, "We'll build it." That summer, construction began. With help from local volunteers, many of whom had read about the rescue in the local newspaper, a new cabin rose from the earth where pine needles softened every step. It wasn't grand, but it was sturdy. Made of reclaimed logs and hand-sawed lumber, the structure stood with wide eaves, a sloping green roof, and a wraparound porch lined with hanging planters. The living room had a stone hearth, and above it, a wooden mantel carved with the words, "For the lost, the found, and the brave." Walter oversaw the work from a rocking chair near the site, still too stiff to swing a hammer, but quick to give advice. He had grown even quieter since his return to the forest, speaking mostly through glances or nods. But when Buck, now limping slightly but full of dignity, lay beside him, the old man would occasionally speak low, almost as if to the dog alone. Ellie, now looking healthier and stronger, split her time between helping care for the twins, Lena and Leo, and working with the local school she'd just rejoined. Her teacher, Mrs. Abigail Whitmore, a tall woman in her 50s with frizzy gray curls and a fondness for wool shawls, assigned the students an essay about "A Day That Changed My Life." Most children wrote about lost toys, a surprise birthday party, or their first pet. Ellie titled hers, "The Day a Dog Saved a Mountain." Her words were simple, yet powerful, raw from a child who had seen too much but still believed in light. She didn't just write about Buck saving her, or Walter, or even her mother's return. She wrote about what it felt like to hear silence in the snow. About the first fire that stayed warm. About how grief could live in the same room as hope, and how sometimes, a dog's breath against your back was all you needed to feel safe. Her teacher submitted the piece to the regional writing contest. Ellie didn't know until she was handed a certificate 2 weeks later, along with a handwritten letter from the governor's office. It read, "Bravery takes many forms. You, young lady, are one of them." As fall crept in and the first frost dusted the ground, a small wooden statue appeared beside the fireplace in the new cabin. It was carved from pine, about 2 feet tall, and shaped to resemble a sitting German shepherd. The detail was delicate, each fold of fur, the slight tilt of the ears, the steadiness of his gaze. Buck, the living dog, blinked at it curiously once, then lay down beside it, as if recognizing himself. The plaque beneath read, "Guardian of the Hearth." Buck became a symbol in town. Tourists stopped by the new shelter, many asking to take photos with the real dog, still dignified, still quiet. Ellie insisted he only posed when he wanted to. Sometimes he did. Sometimes he walked off. She never forced it. After all, Buck had never been tamed. He had chosen them. One morning, Claire stood on the porch of the new cabin, her twins swaddled and dozing in a basket at her feet. Walter sat beside her in silence. Ellie leaned against the railing, her sweater sleeves pushed to her elbows, eyes scanning the forest. "I think he's coming back," Ellie whispered. And just then, Buck trotted out from between the trees, a squirrel chased off from his path, a pinecone caught in his fur. Walter chuckled softly. Claire smiled. He always comes back. And now, so did they all. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or light, they come quietly, as an old man with a kind heart, a tired old dog by the fire, or a little girl holding her baby brother and baby sister in a snowstorm. In the darkness, it was kindness, hope, and quiet faith that kept them warm. If you believe God is still doing good in this world, share this story with someone who needs a little light. And if your heart was touched, leave a comment that simply says Amen, a small prayer for miracles still unfolding. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and may God walk with you always.